Did you know that the sodium atom is actually about 25% larger than a lithium atom?
Which sounds like, a completely obscure piece of trivia.
Right. It sounds like something you'd sleep through in a high school chemistry class. But that tiny microscopic discrepancy in size is, well, it's the exact reason why your smartphone, your electric car, they don't run on cheap, abundant seawater.
Because we have oceans full of sodium, but it's just a little bit too bulky.
Exactly. It's historically just torn apart the internal structure of batteries when it tries to, move back and forth during a charge cycle. It is a physical, material reality that engineers have been fighting against for decades.
It really is.
Good morning and welcome to Daybreak, broadcasting live from our cozy little station on Commercial Street in Atchison, Kansas. Whether you're pouring a fresh cup of coffee or just unfolding the morning paper, you are listening to our daily deep dive.
And today we are looking at the physical, material reality of our world. How we build it, how we understand it, and really how we shape it.
Because we know you, our listeners. You appreciate great books, classical education, real craftsmanship, and the quiet beauty of small-town life. So we are filtering out all the noise, the internet drama, the sensationalism, to bring you stories that actually nourish the mind and the soul.
Which is such a refreshing change of pace, honestly.
It is. And we have a really rich stack of sources today. We've got local Atchison developments, a massive nationwide boom in classical education, some cutting-edge MIT engineering, and the timeless art of old-time radio.
It sounds like a lot of different things, but there is a distinct thread tying it all together.
Yeah, I was thinking about this morning. Looking at today's news is kind of like walking through a well-built house.
I like that analogy.
Right. We start with the sturdy local foundation right here in Atchison.
Mm-hmm.
Then we move into the framing, which is provided by classical education. We can marvel at the modern plumbing and the engineering and the sciences. And finally, we just relax by the hearth with a good story on the radio.
And what unites all of those things, from 3D printed materials all the way to G.K. Chesterton, is this profound respect for craftsmanship.
Craftsmanship and the common good.
Exactly. It's about what happens when human beings stop treating the world as just some passive, disposable commodity, and they start engaging with it deeply and deliberately.
So let's start with that local foundation, physical
Right.
architecture, right in our own backyard. The anchor story from the local dispatches today is the massive development at Benedictine College.
The new library, right?
Yeah, the new Moritz Library in D'Aniello Hall.
Mm-hmm.
And the blueprints, the physical construction, they are modeled directly on Independence Hall in Philadelphia.
Which is just a massive undertaking.
They just hosted over 1,500 people for a July 4th preview, celebrating the upcoming 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And the official dedication is already set for September 26, 2026.
The sheer scale of what they're constructing is remarkable. I mean, replicating Independence Hall isn't just a simple matter of copying a floor plan.
No, not at all.
It's Georgian architecture. And that relies heavily on strict mathematical proportions. You've got the golden ratio, symmetrical fenestration, which is just the arrangement of windows, and very specific brickwork techniques.
Like the Flemish bond, right?
Yeah.
Where the bricks alternate.
Exactly. The long side and the short side alternate to create this very specific structural and visual texture. Recreating that level of 18th century masonry and woodwork today requires sourcing highly specific materials and, frankly, finding craftsmen who can actually execute it.
Well, let me push back on this a little bit, though. Let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Looking at the immense cost and the logistical friction of sourcing that kind of masonry, I mean, why do it?
You're wondering if it's worth it.
Yeah. I mean, isn't a library ultimately just a warehouse for books? The primary function in 2026 is housing digital databases and providing quiet study spaces.
From a purely utilitarian standpoint, sure.
Right. A modern, climate-controlled glass and steel cube achieves all of those functions for a fraction of the cost. So isn't building a Georgian replica just, I don't know, an exercise in historical cosplay?
That is exactly the critique a modernist architectural philosophy would level at this project.
Because they just want efficiency.
Right. The modernist mantra is form follows function. So if the function is just storing books, the form should be a hyper-efficient box. But the architects and the administration behind the Moritz Library are arguing something totally different.
What's their argument?
According to the college's media and culture site, they're arguing that architecture is a physical language. A glass box communicates raw utility, right? It tells the student that they are essentially just a data processing unit in a machine.
Oh, wow. That's a bleak way to look at a glass box, but I get it.
But Georgian architecture communicates proportion, history, and civic philosophy.
So the building itself is making an argument before you even open a single book.
Precisely. By deliberately housing the Catholic intellectual tradition, the theology, the philosophy, the literature inside a structural replica of the birthplace of American liberty, they are physically marrying those concepts.
Faith and freedom.
Yes. It demonstrates that faith and freedom aren't mutually exclusive. They are deeply interdependent. When a student walks up to that building, the physical reality of those bricks and that bell tower is meant to impart a sense of gravity and heritage.
Something a glass cube just cannot do.
Exactly.
That is fascinating. It makes the architecture an active participant in the education. And, speaking of the physical reality of bricks and mortar and local craftsmanship, I saw a profile in the Atchison Globe this week that just pairs perfectly with this.
Oh, the blacksmith story.
Yes, the bearded blacksmith of Atchison. We literally have a local craftsman working with a forge, an anvil, and a hammer, shaping iron right here on our streets.
Blacksmithing is one of those trades that absolutely forces you to respect material reality. I mean, you cannot bully steel.
No, you definitely can't.
You have to understand the specific crystalline structure of the metal. When a blacksmith heats iron, they are actually altering its molecular state.
Really? Just with heat?
Yeah. They're turning the room temperature steel into something called austenite. And if they quench it in water or oil too quickly, it becomes incredibly hard, but brittle enough to shatter like glass.
Oh, so they have to get the temperature exactly right.
Exactly. The blacksmith has to feel the heat radiating from the forge. They have to observe the exact color of the glowing metal from, cherry red to incandescent white, just to know when to strike.
It's deeply embodied knowledge. You can't learn that from a YouTube video. You have to feel the vibration of the hammer in your elbow. But what struck me in a Globe coverage was how this sits right alongside the local civic news.
EMS vote.
Yeah, in the very same issue. Atchison County voters passed a countywide EMS sales tax. And it wasn't even close. It was a definitive 2,115 yes votes to 954 no votes.
It might seem like a really sharp left turn to go from metallurgy to municipal tax policy.
It's a bit of a pivot, sure.
But if we look at this through the lens of G.K. Chesterton's philosophy of localism, these two things are actually intimately connected.
How so?
Well, Chesterton argued fiercely against the modern tendency to outsource everything to distant corporations or massive bureaucracies.
Subsidiarity. The idea that issues should be handled by the smallest, most local, competent authority.
Exactly. So the blacksmith represents subsidiarity in economics. It's a community retaining the physical ability to forge its own tools, valuing the craftsman down the street over a supply chain that stretches across the Pacific Ocean.
Right. And the EMS tax.
That represents subsidiarity in civic care. The voters didn't petition a distant federal authority to solve their emergency medical needs. They made a deliberate, collective choice to tax themselves.
To put their own money on the line to care for their neighbors.
Right, so that when someone dials 911, an ambulance actually arrives.
It's a total rejection of passivity. The community is taking tangible responsibility.
And that requires a massive amount of civic trust, You only vote to tax yourself if you feel a genuine bond with the people benefiting from it. It's the civic equivalent of the blacksmith's hammer, tangible, localized, and directly applied to the reality of the town.
So if that's the foundation, this deep respect for local craftsmanship and civic duty, how do we ensure the next generation understands how to maintain it?
That is the big question.
And it leads us directly into our next set of sources, because we are seeing a documented nationwide renaissance in classical and Catholic education. This exact spirit of localized learning is catching fire.
The data coming out of this sector is staggering, especially when you contrast it with traditional public schooling trends. The anchor source here is the Chesterton Schools Network.
Right. They just won the massive YAS Prize, $1 million.
Which is huge. It's essentially the Pulitzer of the education reform world.
A massive validation of their model. The prize committee noted they are expanding internationally and proving that parents are just desperate for an alternative to what they call the modern learning crisis.
We really need to unpack that term, learning crisis, because it's not just about falling test scores.
What is it about, then?
The argument from classical education proponents is that the modern industrialized model of schooling is fundamentally broken in its design. Since the early 20th century, mainstream education has increasingly treated students like raw materials on an assembly line.
Just optimizing them for standardized tests.
Exactly, to eventually output them as specialized, compliant workers for a corporate economy.
It feels like we've been feeding a whole generation educational fast food, just memorizing data. And suddenly they're being offered this rich, home-cooked meal of literature and philosophy, and they are devouring it.
That's a great way to put it. Classical education relies on the trivium, right? Grammar, logic, and rhetoric. It argues that a child's brain goes through natural developmental stages, and you have to teach to those stages.
And we see this working at the collegiate level, too. The dispatches from Notre Dame College are incredible. Their best week ever high school summer program just broke all-time attendance records.
And they recently graduated 18 students with Master of Arts degrees.
Plus, Dr. Daniel McInerney won the 2025 Jacques Maritain Prize for Nonfiction. And we have the release of the 2025-2026 Newman Guide by the Cardinal Newman Society, helping families navigate faithful education.
Jacques Maritain is actually a crucial figure to understand here. He argued fiercely against the hyperspecialization of the modern university.
Because education isn't just job training.
Exactly. It's about the awakening of the human person to truth, beauty, and goodness. If you only train a student in one technical skill, they become obsolete the second the technology changes. But if you train them how to reason, how to read the great books, they become adaptable.
They become moral citizens. But, reading through these sources, a phrase keeps popping up that feels a little counterintuitive to me. Atmosphere of joy.
It does seem a bit contradictory.
Right. Because we associate high academic rigor with, high anxiety and sleep deprivation. How are they cultivating joy while making teenagers read Homer and Dante? If someone handed me Thomas Aquinas at age 15, I don't think my first emotion would be joy.
I think most 15-year-olds would agree with you. But the sources argue that the joy comes from removing the utilitarian pressure.
The pressure of the test score.
Right. When a student's self-worth is tied to a standardized test that supposedly determines their entire future, you get tripling anxiety. But the classical framework presents the universe as a mystery to be explored, not a test to be passed.
So when they read Dante, they aren't scanning for facts to regurgitate.
No, they're engaging in a conversation about the nature of the human soul. The authors of these curricula argue that this appeals to our natural sense of wonder, and wonder inherently produces joy.
I want to pose this to you, the listener. Think about your own education. Did it spark wonder, or did it feel like an assembly line? How does viewing education as intellectual formation change your approach to lifelong learning?
It's a fundamental shift in perspective.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, we often put a hard wall between the humanities and STEM. We assume the kids reading Dante aren't going to build bridges or cure diseases, but our next sources completely shatter that idea.
Because the pursuit of truth doesn't stop at philosophy. It extends directly into the physical world, into the hard sciences, engineering, and medicine.
Let's start with the medical side. Benedictine College's board of directors has greenlit a major milestone for a school of osteopathic medicine. They hired a preclinical dean, and the students even prayed 20 rosaries in 20 days for the mission.
Which is incredible grassroots support. And the decision to pursue an osteopathic medical school, a DO school rather than an MD school, is incredibly deliberate.
Clarify that for me, because a lot of people think DO and MD are exactly the same thing.
In terms of modern licensing and surgery, they are largely equivalent. But the foundational philosophy is different. Traditional allopathic medicine, the MD route, has historically leaned into a reductionist model, viewing the body as a machine made of parts.
So if a part breaks, you just fix or remove that one part.
Right, but osteopathic medicine is holistic. The core tenet is that the body is an interconnected unit. Osteopathic physicians receive hundreds of hours of extra training in the musculoskeletal system.
They learn to physically palpate the muscles and joints.
Exactly. To diagnose how, say, an alignment issue in the spine might be causing a respiratory issue. It operates on the belief that the body has an inherent capacity for self-regulation and healing.
It's treating the human being as a complex, dignified whole, rather than a machine with broken parts, which perfectly aligns with the classical education model we just talked about.
It's the medical manifestation of their philosophy department.
Okay, so that respect for material reality bridges us perfectly to the engineering news out of MIT. These three stories read like a masterclass in modern craftsmanship.
MIT is doing some profound work rooted in physical stewardship right now.
Let's talk about the battery story. MIT researchers are making sodium metal batteries a practical reality by solving the solvent problem. We mentioned earlier that we want to move away from lithium because it's rare and destructive to mine, and sodium is abundant. But what is this solvent problem?
It gets down to the microscopic architecture. In a battery, ions travel back and forth through a liquid electrolyte. Lithium is a small, nimble ion. Sodium is larger.
So it struggles to move through the liquid.
Worse. As sodium ions move, they gather a cluster of solvent molecules around them, a solvation sheath. When they reach the electrode, they have to shed this sheath. But because sodium is larger, it struggles to shed it cleanly.
And what happens then?
The solvent breaks down. It forms a thick crust on the electrode, and worse, it forms dendrites, these microscopic spikes of metal that grow across the battery until they short-circuit it and cause a fire.
Oh, wow. So they just catch fire. That's a pretty big problem.
The massive problem. But the MIT researchers painstakingly engineered a new class of electrolytes that tunes the solvation sheath, allowing the sodium to deposit evenly without forming dangerous dendrites.
That is an incredible level of precision. It's an act of stewardship, using deep intellect to harness an abundant material and replace a scarce one. And we see that same ethos in the second MIT story.
Recyclable yarn.
Yes. Engineers designed a recyclable elastic yarn made from polyethylene. It mimics the stretch of spandex, but you can melt it down and respin it over and over. But wait, polyethylene is what plastic grocery bags are made of. How do you make a plastic bag behave like spandex?
This is the magic of polymer physics. Spandex gets its stretch from permanent chemical bonds, like a microscopic net. You can stretch it, but you can't easily melt it down. It just burns.
Which is why it sits in landfills forever.
Right. But with polyethylene, the MIT engineers didn't use permanent chemical bonds. They manipulated the physical structure so the polymer chains entangle with each other in specific crystalline domains.
Kind of like a microscopic bowl of sticky spaghetti.
Exactly. When you pull it, the chains uncoil, but the crystalline knots hold them together so it snaps back.
But because it's just a physical entanglement.
When you apply enough heat, the crystals melt, the chains slide freely, and you can extrude it into brand new yarn, over and over.
It's mechanical genius applied to an ecological problem, respecting creation instead of generating permanent waste.
And that requires highly skilled people to execute, which brings us to the third MIT story, the Tech AMP program.
Right, a 12-month certificate program upskilling technicians for advanced manufacturing leadership, bridging the gap between the mechanic and the engineer. But, I mean, why is there a gap? If a computer model tells you how a part works, isn't that enough?
Because computer models exist in a frictionless vacuum. The real world is messy. An engineer might design a flawless titanium part on a screen, but when the machinist tries to actually cut that metal, friction generates immense heat. The metal expands, the tool chatters.
The physical reality fights back.
Exactly. The technician has embodied knowledge of how materials actually behave. TechM is elevating these technicians, teaching them leadership and engineering principles so they can sit at the same table as the theoreticians.
It acknowledges the dignity of skilled labor. It really is just modern blacksmithing.
It all comes back to the blacksmith.
So we've looked at how we shape the physical world with our hands and minds. Now let's pivot. Let's turn to how we shape the imagination through culture, community, and the theater of the mind.
And we head back to Atchison for this.
Yes, looking ahead to the 29th Annual Amelia Earhart Festival on July 17th and 18th, 2026, celebrating aviation history and high-flying fun.
Events like this are so vital. We talked about subsidiarity, local communities governing themselves, but you can't have a functioning local government if people don't actually know each other.
Right, a festival provides that shared narrative. It's the civic hearth. But what happens after the festival? When you go home to your living room, how do you engage your imagination?
For our listeners, the answer is often the Chesterton Radio Substack and Rumble live streams.
The 24/7 open door stream is incredible right now. They've got the timeless family values of One Man's Family, the golden age detective work in Dorothy L. Sayers' Clouds of Witness with Lord Peter Wimsey, and the spine-tingling suspense of the 1948 Quiet Please episode, The Thing on the Forable Board.
That Quiet Please episode is a masterclass in psychological terror.
But I have to ask, we live in a society saturated by high-definition CGI. You can put on a VR headset. Why does a scratchy radio play from 1948 still hold our attention? How can an audio recording be scarier than a CGI movie?
It comes down to cognitive neuroscience. When you watch a heavily CGI-laden film, your brain is just engaged in passive reception. The director made every creative decision for you.
Like having someone else chew your food for you.
Exactly. But audio drama requires active cognitive participation. When the narrator describes a dark hallway, your brain has to instantly construct that hallway.
You're being handed the ingredients and cooking the masterpiece in your own mind.
Right. Your brain pulls from its own personal library of fears. When that episode uses a bizarre, muffled sound for the monster, your imagination fills the gap with the most terrifying thing you can conceptualize. A Hollywood director can never design a monster as frightening as your own subconscious can.
It respects your intelligence. It fosters an active rather than passive engagement with beauty and mystery.
And that active engagement is the thread running through everything today. Whether it's a student reading Dante, an MIT engineer weaving recyclable yarn, or a family listening to the radio, it all comes back to a love for truth and careful craftsmanship.
It's all about how we respond to the reality we've been given.
And I want to leave the listener with a final thought on this, inspired by Chesterton's The Outline of Sanity. We've talked about building things, but building a culture also requires knowing what not to destroy.
Chesterton's fence.
Yes. The idea that you shouldn't tear down a fence until you understand why it was put up in the first place. The salvation of civilization won't come from massive global bureaucracies. It comes from the small, ordinary things.
Preserves in a local library, a blacksmith shop, or a radio broadcast.
We have the power to build the culture we want, right where we are.
That is a phenomenal place to land today. Well, to our listeners, tonight on Chesterton Radio, enjoy a deep dive into G.K. Chesterton's book, Tremendous Trifles. https://u2.b88quai24at4c8.isha jhar says yaca4cp.
It's a wonderful collection of essays that unpacks the profound truths hidden in ordinary things.
Be sure to check out today's scheduled programs on the station, including the continuous stories on the open door. We warmly invite you to visit Chesterton Radio, tune into the live stream, and subscribe to the Substack newsletter. Thanks for joining us for the morning paper and coffee. We'll see you tomorrow on Daybreak.